Okay, let's get started. I'm Bob Carney Jr. and I am a candidate on the Republican primary ballot for governor running against Tom Emmer. I am here to announce today that if I win the Republican primary, I will offer to withdraw as a candidate if the Republican convention is reconvened and they endorse a reasonable mainstream Republican candidate for governor other than Emmer. I think we need to make the Republican primary a referendum on Tom Emmer. His candidacy has proven to be disastrous. He is advocating what amounts to secession in House File 3738, which he introduced as a co-author during the legislative session. We've seen him in action at the Eagle Street Grill calling for a tips credit under the mistaken impression that servers are earning over $100,000, something that the owner at that grill later said that he never told Emmer. I've got a complete video of his news event there from the time he started talking about $100,000 servers forward. Within 5 minutes of making that statement, he was saying well over $100,000. So he's extremely careless with the facts. He later went to an event at Old Mexico Restaurante to supposedly listen to servers and repeatedly denied that he had ever called for reducing servers' wages. That is, in fact, exactly what a tips credit is. And I have this fully documented in Tom and Me, Episode 3, which is on YouTube and on my website, my news and information website, republicancontract.com. Mr. Emmer has not released a budget. He has irresponsibly suggested on Minnesota Public Radio that it would be easy to cut a third from all state spending, and that's about $20 billion out of a total spending budget at all levels of about $60 billion. But again, he has not detailed any method of doing this. I had an op-ed piece in the Star Tribune taking a look at the situation with the unallotment law, and the fact is that that law still gives the governor extraordinary power to, in effect, take over the role of the legislature in establishing policies and priorities. The Minnesota Supreme Court ruling, in fact, is very narrow. It says that the biennium has to start with a balanced budget, but that's the only precedent that is required. The rest of that opinion is dicta. And it's very easy to start with a balanced budget. All you would have to do is veto the K-12 bill and veto the Health and Human Services bill. At that point, the Supreme Court requirements met, and the governor could then call a special session and allow the legislature to pass anything that they think is reasonable, and he could sign it. But he could then use the unallotment to cut any percentage from 0 to 100 of any appropriation based on his own view of what priorities should be. And as long as there's 1/3 plus 1 of boots on the ground in the legislature to back that up, the governor's actions could be enforced. And there would be no additional tax revenue. Given what Mr. Emmer has said about how easy it would be to cut $20 billion, it's hard to think that he would do anything other than cutting to try to bridge a $6 billion budget gap. That would be extremely disruptive. We need to cut going forward. There's no question about that. But it has to be done in an orderly, deliberate way, and it has to be done by the legislature, not by the governor. My commitment from now to the election is to work to get somebody other than Tom Emmer on the Republican ballot for governor by November. This has happened before. In the 1990 election, Grunseth was replaced just a couple of weeks before the election. And in fact, his replacement, Arnie Carlson, was elected governor. So there is a precedent for doing this. We've got to do something to turn the Republican Party away from the kind of irresponsible, bar-hopping leadership that Tom Emmer represents.
The example you cite in in 1990?
1990.
But the candidate quit the race.
That's correct.
So how are you going to get Emmer to quit the race?
Well, there are two ways that this can happen. Of course, first of all, I can be nominated in the primary. If I get more votes than Emmer, then I'm on the ballot until something else happens. Now, Minnesota statute 204B12 has provisions for withdrawal of candidates. And what I'm saying is that if I win the Republican primary, let's make this Republican primary a referendum on Emmer. If I win the primary, I will withdraw if the Republican convention is reconvened and if they endorse a reasonable mainstream candidate to replace Emmer and me on the ballot. I'm saying I'm willing to withdraw. But if I win the primary, Emmer is off the ballot in November.
So are you asking DFL voters and independent voters to vote in the Republican primary to help with this?
I'm calling on all Minnesotans to take a look at the choices that are available on the primary. We have an open primary. If you think that Tom Emmer needs to be stopped and that's a priority, I'm asking you to vote for me in the primary. I'm asking moderate Republicans to rally and take issue with a Republican Party that's been seized by a very far-right and minority constituency that has taken over the process. The fact is there's about 2,000 delegates that nominated Emmer. It was a close contested race before Marty Seifert called on that convention to endorse him unanimously, and they did. But 2,000 people is less than 0.1% of all of the eligible voters in Minnesota. It'd be like having 50 people at the Metrodome deciding how the whole Metrodome is going to be run. I mean, that's the proportion.
Very good. Anything else?
One other comment I want to make, and that is that during the progressive movement, the direct primary was established as a way to take away the control from political machines. And we have that control today. The Republican Party, in my judgment, in Minnesota is controlled as part of a regime at the national level. And it is as much a political machine as the ones that were challenged in the progressive movement. The direct primary is still an institution that we have in Minnesota for people to make a direct choice of the nominees. We need to go back to that instead of having a very small group of people decide for both parties who the endorsed candidate is going to be and who the nominee is going to be.